There we go. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm laughing because it's the third time I'm potentially doing this. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I trust you are able to hear and see me. Thank you all for joining this webinar today. I must admit it's my first webinar on Zoom this year, so apologies for the small technical difficulties, but thank you for joining today. This is a 30-minute webinar on vehicle sharing. Um, Before we go into the topic itself, just a few housekeeping rules, right? It is a 30-minute webinar. I'm keeping an eye out on the chat, so please let's try to make it as interactive as possible. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I see some of you are doing so already. Thank you. If you are joining this webinar today and you are not a native English speaker, or you would prefer to access this webinar in a different language, we have the possibility. I am just going to quickly invite you to do so if you wish to. You should see a notification now pop up on your screen from Wordly, giving you the option to read the captions of this webinar in the language of your choice. So if that's something you want to do, it's part of our inclusion approach. We want to reach more fleet managers around the world, and that means also providing our webinars in different languages, right? So I hope feel free to make use of this feature if it supports you. We are going to start with the content of this webinar. Allow me to quickly share my screen. Here we go. So, like I said, today we are here to talk about what does sector know about vehicle sharing. I've prepared some slides for you. I'm also monitoring the chat, so feel free to raise questions in between. And then we have a specific time planned for Q&A, but I might pick up some things in between as well based on your comments. So let's go. Why are we talking about this topic, right? And what is the thinking behind it? I'm not sure if you have attended one of our webinars since the start of the year, or maybe you are a Fleet Forum member organization. You might know that last year, October, we had a historic moment in Fleet Forum. It was our 20th anniversary as an organization, but also many of our member organizations are increasingly looking at the environment. It's part of their strategic ambitions. They have strong goals in terms of reducing the environmental impact of their operations. And so we brought together senior managers from our member organizations. And this took some months of preparation. But the important thing I want to share with you is last year, October, many Fleet Forum members made certain commitments in relation to their fleet and the environmental impact of it. And what you are seeing on my screen are the commitments that were made. And one of them is around vehicle sharing. It says within 3 years, our organizations or our member organizations are going to be participating in vehicle sharing initiatives in at least 20% of their operating countries. Vehicle sharing is an increasingly important topic. We see it appearing in different areas, right? So today, I wanted to use the opportunity to give you an up-to-date overview of what's happening in terms of vehicle sharing in the sector. This is not an exhaustive topic. Perhaps there are initiatives that I am overlooking. In case you are aware of them, this is also the moment to let us know. So please feel free to share in the chat box if you are part of vehicle sharing projects, in which countries, what benefits you're getting out of it, what are the challenges. Feel free to share in the chat box. So before we go into the specifics of vehicle sharing, I do want to put this into context in terms of our wider environmental approach, right? I'm not sure if you are familiar with the avoid, shift, improve approach. The thinking behind this is there are many actions that you as a fleet manager can take towards reducing your environmental impact, right? But we would recommend that you look at it from left to right. As much as possible, you want to avoid and reduce the need for motorized travel. When you have avoided as much as possible, then the transport that you are taking, you want to shift it to more environmentally friendly modes. And when you have done that as much as possible, you want to improve the energy efficiency of your transport modes. So the thinking behind this is prioritize actions from left to right. And if we look at vehicle sharing sits in the shift part of the ASI framework. And so it's more specifically on carpooling and vehicle sharing. So let's continue. Now, you might have heard terms like ride sharing, carpooling, vehicle sharing, but what is the difference between these terms, right? And that's what I've tried to visualize for you on the screen. We've borrowed it from our colleagues in our colleague UN agencies, as that is where we first saw some vehicle sharing initiatives. And what you're seeing on my screen is there is a wider and a newer taxonomy in terms of passenger mobility services, right? And I would put them into two buckets. One is around ride sharing. And here, what you're seeing is indeed, this is about multiple passengers. They can be from the same organization, the same project, even, or the same office, or they can also be between different agencies. And the thinking behind that is that they are traveling in the same vehicle for the same ride. And that's what we call ride sharing. Whereas carpooling or vehicle sharing, this is more interagency. And I love this picture because it makes a clear visual of what are we trying to show here, right? And this is more about NGOs or UN agencies, organizations in general, sharing their vehicles and their drivers to be able to provide mobility services. And this is what is also known as vehicle sharing. So we sometimes use this term to encompass all the different topics, but as we get now more into the implementation of these, it's important to understand the terminology and be more acquainted with it as a fleet manager, because you are also the person most likely leading these initiatives or implementing these initiatives in your organization. Now, where are we today? I'm going to show you, I want to start first by reflecting on what are the benefits of this, right? So vehicle sharing, it's not a new concept. Perhaps it's new or it's fresh in the sector, but it's not new to the commercial sector. Many of us have even used, let's say, Uber or Lyft or other, the concept in itself might not be new to many of us. What I do, if we try to apply it to the humanitarian sector, though, what I want to point out to you is that there are many benefits behind this, right? And you see that visualized on my screen. You can save money from this. If you reduce the number of trips, I see some of our colleagues are having some technical difficulties. In case you are, feel free to log out and log back in, right? I've double checked the connection on my side. I'm pretty sure it's working fine. Like I was saying, there are a number of different benefits to this, right? And let's start from a cost perspective. If you are running fewer trips because you are able to consolidate these in your own organization, or you are able to share vehicles or trips with other organizations, this will automatically bring down your costs. So there's a cost benefit to this. There is an environmental benefit to this. We always say in Fleet Forum, the cleanest kilometers are the ones that are not driven, right? And in this case, when you are combining trips between organizations, you are reducing the number of kilometers being driven because you're sharing these kilometers. So there's definitely a positive environmental impact as well. Time. I think if many global fleet managers, I know some of you are on the line today. And I'm sure country fleet managers can also attest to this. The role of a fleet manager is not something. There are not many offices where there are professional, dedicated fleet managers, right? This is a role that we are constantly having to advocate for, to demonstrate the value of a professional fleet manager. So amidst all of this, if there are opportunities to reduce time, to make ourselves more efficient, and this is definitely one of them, right? Vehicle sharing, it does take a lot of time to get it started, and you will see that when we talk later on the implementation challenges of it. But in the longer term, it is helping you spend less time having to dispatch vehicles, having to allocate trips, because you are combining these, you are reducing your administrative time and the back office work in terms of your vehicles. So there's a time benefit to it. There's a safety benefit to it. I think we don't often think about this one, but it's definitely a benefit. What I mean by that is if you are driving fewer kilometers, you also have less crash the exposure. It's less likely that your staff or and the communities where you're operating, you are having a less crash risk exposure. And last but not least, I think a benefit is many, how do I say this? We have more and more initiatives, like those of you who are in UN agencies might be familiar with the One UN initiative. I think we are, for example, partnering with Hulo. Why do I bring this up, right? Is there is a benefit also with collaborating. There's a part about sharing resources, of course, but there's also a social and collaborative aspect when if you are able to sit in the same vehicle and exchange with each other in a specific country office or an operating context, there's also there are things that you can learn about each other. You might connect to projects or you might expand your network in ways that you also didn't anticipate before. So there's also a positive social impact, right, on in terms of vehicle sharing. So these are the benefits around it, right? But let's go more now into where's the proof of this? So not so long ago, less than 2 years ago, we started a vehicle sharing pilot among NGOs. And Lebanon was the first location where we started, right? And I want to take you through some of the data analysis that we did to because it's one thing to talk about vehicle sharing and say, oh, there's cost and there's these benefits, but let's try to quantify these, right? Like, are these small benefits? Are these big benefits? So what you're seeing on my screen is at this in the early stages of the project, we worked with different organizations, we gathered data, and we tried to make an estimate of the potential of vehicle sharing, right? And what you're seeing is that we looked at Lebanon because it's a very appealing context in terms of the proximity of organizations, the types of routes, and what we observed in during that pilot is that when we combine the trip data of only three organizations, and over a 6 month period, we looked at the different trips they're taking, the destinations, the times, the cost that the three organizations are incurring, and what we looked at the sharing potential, right? How could we combine these different trips? And here, what we notice is that if we try to combine these different trips and share vehicles together, the pilot showed us that there was a potential to have a reduction between 20 to 30% in terms of number of trips taken. And then this, of course, has a cost and an environmental benefit as well. So this is already something that we started to realize just by gathering the data together with the fleet managers and exchanging with each other. Then we actually ran a pilot. And here the pilot was focused on using a minibus, a minivan, and looking at the potential of combining, and having shared trips between agencies. And what you see on my screen is that we observed that when an organization is taking an individual trip, it's cost in this is in a 5-seater van, it's costing them approximately $85, as you can see, right? But when these four organizations are then sharing a minivan, it's bringing down the cost per agency significantly to the point that there is a 65% cost saving per trip. And this is a key benefit. I mean, we're not talking about 2 or 3% here, right? We're talking about 65%. So there is what we saw in Lebanon already, and we've already concluded the pilot over there, and we are now in the phase 2 of the project, is that there are some really there are some very strong cost benefits, efficiency benefits. There are environmental benefits to this. And it's definitely why we are actively working with Fleet Forum member organizations and our partners to see how we can continue to expand and scale up vehicle sharing across the sector. Right now, so I use the example of Lebanon, right? But you might say, Nikita, well, that was in Lebanon. How about does this work in other operating contexts? Right now, we are in discussions in Central African Republic to also have a pilot, a vehicle sharing pilot over there. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the context of Central African Republic, but let me tell you a little bit more in detail what is going on, right? UNHAS is running a number of different flights between Bangui and Bambari, and what they are planning on reducing the number of flights that are going to be taken. So what we've done recently is we've worked with a number of organizations who are based in Central African Republic, whose staff members are using these flights. And what you're seeing on my screen is that currently in 2023, for about approximately 320 passengers, the cost to have these staff members take these trips was about almost 100K US dollars. Now, if we consider that the flights are going to be reduced by about approximately 25%, and these trips now need to be taken more by road, if we look at each individual organization, using their data, using realistic, real data from the operating context of Central African Republic, we are anticipating that every organization if they took all these trips individually, um, what the impact of this was, it would cost about $66,000 for the total amount for these organizations if they took their trips individually. And you might notice over there on my screen, it says 2 vehicles. Yes, because this is a operating context with a higher security risk. So then there are certain procedures to follow as well, which means having 2 vehicles each time. And in essence, though, the point I want to make is that this would cost the organizations collectively $66,000. But if they would look at combining these trips, meaning sharing their vehicles, taking trips together, sharing their fleet, while respecting the security procedures of having 2 vehicles at the same time, this would cost $33,000. So there's a real saving here that every organization would be able to benefit if they brought their resources together, if they pooled their resources, and committed and go forward with this project, right? And we are at the starting point of this project, of kicking it off, of moving it forward. But there's a very serious benefit to be gained here. And this is the point I want to bring across. It's not only in Lebanon as a starting pilot, but I understand it's potentially only the second project that we're running, but so far already what we are seeing is that there are some very serious benefits to be gained. Now, if you might be saying, okay, Makita, interesting, how can I sign up for something like this, right? Or where can I start in my context with this? So my suggestion to you is tap into the projects that are there already. So the initiatives that I know of are the ones I've shared with you, right? So Lebanon, Central African Republic, or you can also get in touch with the UN Booking Hub team. There's also I've focused now on the examples in the NGO space, but there is a dedicated team within WFP who is focused on booking on sharing vehicles on a dedicated system that can support UN agencies to share. So if you are a UN agency, maybe it's worth getting in touch, or at least learning more about this project. Or if there are other projects going on, I'm checking the chat box, but I don't see anybody else who's saying I know of another initiative. If you do, please, now would be the perfect time to share. But if none of these three, if options work for you, another option is to say, okay, well, let me be a pioneer. Let me be the first one in my operating context to start this project, right? And we have a resource for you. There's a publicly available vehicle sharing starting guide, which we've developed. There are a number of different tools. I'm going to get to it in the next couple of minutes that you can use to kickstart this in your operating context. Let me So how exactly do you start, right? My tip to you, I see there's more than 50 of us on the line today. My tip to you would be find one fellow fleet manager who you are maybe in touch with in your operating context, and start sharing data together to make a high level business case, exactly like we did at the start of the Lebanon project, right? To show the potential to your senior management. And what this means is you would need to start with sharing some cost data, and I've given you some examples of that, right? So it's in essence getting a full picture of your total cost of ownership of your fleet, and also the kilometers that you're traveling, and similarly to start gathering some data around and have a discussion and share travel data. So what I mean with this is you want to sit together with your fellow fleet manager and bring together your data around the dates, the times of the journey, the routes, the number of passengers, and then to see, okay, what would be the potential if we could combine these trips, right? And use when you look at that potential and you also contrast it with your costs, you are then able to make a high level business case on what is the savings potential in terms of time, in terms of number of trips, in terms of costs, and also in terms of CO2 emissions. So start by connecting with one fellow fleet manager. You don't need to bring 10 or 15 different organizations together. You only need to bring, you can start with one colleague fleet manager and looking at the savings potential there. The other thing that you could do to start preparing and warming your senior management up to this is, aside from drafting the high level business case, is to make an implementation plan, right? Or a rollout plan on how to approach this. And for here too, we have some tips and pointers for you. In the same vehicle sharing starting guide I was mentioning, there are a number of different guidance documents that we provide to you in terms of what minimum requirements to set, what safety and movement rules to consider, but also to identify the most efficient way of operating, right? And to think about what platform are you going to use to share movements. It doesn't need to be something very sophisticated, right? But there needs to be, when you share between organizations, even if it's only two organizations, you need to align with each other, right? So making agreements on what platform to share, which stakeholders to engage, who is going to take the lead, on what schedule and how the schedule is shared. These are the types of questions you need to align with your fellow fleet manager, and then also align your own internal stakeholders. I only have one more message for you before I take a pause, and so we can go into a Q&A, is please remember vehicle sharing. It's a sensitive topic. It's not an easy one. And you need a very strong change management approach to this. And the little bullet points that you are seeing on my screen, these are lessons that we have learned from the recent pilots that we have conducted. It starts with treating this as a change project, planning your communications, your change management activities, starting small, right? Like I said, if you start with 10, 15 organizations, you're also going to move very slow. Better to start with a smaller group of people, start with two organizations, and then build it up from there. Um, Find one champion in your management teams, respectively, so a senior manager who's walking the talk on this, who's going to be amongst the first to share trips, or at least to be an active and visible leader and champion of this topic. Involve your security and your finance focal points from the start. Your security focal points will have an opinion on how to maintain and preserve the safety of the security of staff, and your finance colleagues will be great sounding boards and supporters in thinking along on the cost sharing structure. And spotlight early successes. The first trips you'll take, make a big hoopla about it to also build the enthusiasm for this project, and to encourage more and more staff members to share their trips. So this is in a nutshell where we are today on vehicle sharing in the sector. I'm going to take a pause now and see what questions you have. Thank you, Nasser. I'm seeing lots of fantastic as always. Of course, I also want some questions. Colleagues, do we have any questions or comments? I haven't seen any of you share any, not only questions, but I have also not seen remarks. Um, is there anybody who's sharing vehicles today? There's now 55 of us on the line, so there is some potential I would maybe hope. Um, Not seeing any questions so far. Um, okay, I see. Um, Okay, there we go. Some questions are popping up, or in comments. So we have our colleague Mohammed who's saying we are starting now working on this. Great, fantastic. This is exactly what we are trying to. I mean, I really took some time today to walk you through starting steps because I recognize that many of us are at the start of this journey, right? And it's important that we stay close to each other, that we can build on the small successes and start gradually building and expanding these. I see Susanna, great, we are thinking about trying it with the Alliance 2015 members. I think most of them are Fleet Forum members, so we would definitely would want to support you and if we can guide you in any shape or form, please let us know. Um, Andrew, have participants raised concerns about vehicle sharing reducing their own ability to conduct evacuations if required? Um, to my knowledge, see, what I've experienced at the start of the project is when we kick started, usually the first questions that come up are around security. How are we going to preserve our protocols, right? And that's why we're saying it's better to get your security focal points from the table at the start and to agree what is possible. In the case of Lebanon, we started with saying, okay, we are not all sharing vehicles. Instead, we are going to get a shared shuttle and contribute to that, right? Which then allows other organizations to reduce their own fleet size. And we looked at some specific trips in Central African Republic. We're looking at two things. One is the potential for airport to support staff moving from their base to the airport in Bangui, and the other one is in light of the reduction of UNHA's flights, right? Um, so I think that and what I want to say with that is, yes, there are some concerns at the start, but that's why we say get security focal points together to see which trips are in a good position and to start. And also, as we are discussing in the context of Central African Republic with the UNHA's flights reduction, there we are going to be taking trips where there are security challenges, but we are finding a way around this. Um, Let me see, was there any constraint on the vehicle standard? Um, so far, like I said, I don't think those have been, from what we've seen, there are good questions at the start of the project, but with a strong MOU, with strong alignment between the different colleagues, there are ways to overcome this, right? And I think when it comes to vehicle standards, you'd be surprised, but many of our organizations are predominantly using very similar brands and models and makes. So it's usually, it doesn't seem to be, that is not a specific showstopper, Tishbiya. Um, what was specific on the car context that made it work? Peter, good question. I want to be clear. We are in working in Central African Republic at the moment. It's not a closed pilot. We are in the thick of the project. But what I think is interesting to see is that sometimes the challenges like it is the reduction of UNHA's flights, which is creating an opportunity and a sense of urgency to work on the project, right? So and and the increase of fuel prices as well. My colleague is whispering to me. So the increase of fuel prices is also something that had a big impact, and you can also see as a common denominator between these two projects, right? Peter tells you, "We hear you, Rose." Let me see. I think the issue in some cases is related to donor compliance, since donors might ask how you're using the vehicles. Yes and no, John. I think there's two things to consider. Well, USAID is a big funder of Fleet Forum activities, our capacity building activities. Our work is our partnership with Hulu, but through which these two pilots are also being supported currently, is through ECHO funding. In my experience, there are a growing number of donors that are actively championing these topics, that are also giving us the space to challenge them and to think along how we can incorporate vehicle sharing into our project proposals. And I think when you have the important thing, in my experience, is to not only deal with this on a case by case with each donor, but to have a strong fleet management policy, to have a strong fleet management manual that is actively saying we have a strong environmental objectives, and therefore vehicle sharing is something we are applying to uh, as much as possible to all our projects. That way, you're not trying to embed it in each project proposal and then getting challenged by the donor, but you are saying this is our organizational standard. This is how we work in general. I think when you do that, you get less how do you say counter yeah, you get less pushback from donors. I see we are running out of time. I'm going to take one last one because it's a very interesting topic. I see a colleague has mentioned, I've been trying to sell the idea of implementing a car sharing scheme for partner organizations, but the idea is usually rejected for political reasons. Is there any suggestion to sell the idea to the political level? Thank you, colleague, for raising the question. I think here what I would suggest is like you saw with the project in well, I'm not sure where it's a follow-up question, but I'm wondering where the political pushback is coming. Is it from the partner organizations, from your own organization? I think I would highly recommend that we start and you saw that with the Lebanon project, with first gathering data together with the fleet managers of the different organizations to show the savings potential. That is the first point. That is where I would start, because when you are able to express the cost savings and not say or just say there are cost savings, but to really use data to say this is really the potential impact if we are to implement it, then I think you make a more compelling case. Super. Colleagues, we have run out of time, but please note this is a topic, as you saw from the summit commitments, it's active, it's very important to us. We are constantly challenging ourselves also internally and our members to see how we can increase the uptake of this. So if you have any feedback after this, questions, support that you would require, please don't hesitate to reach out. When in the follow-up email to this webinar, we will include links to the vehicle sharing starting guide. Would highly recommend that you take a look at it. And I hope to see you back on the 20th of March, where we are going to be talking about a step-by-step approach to setting and interpreting your baseline. Also a summit commitment. So thank you all for your time today. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in our upcoming webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.